This year, 2017, is on a really good track.
That is how the EU sees its economy growing, but across the other side of the world, there are signs that China is taking its foot off the accelerator. Also on the programme, the Arctic. It's cold and inhospitable, and it's become a battleground between environmentalists and Norway's government over oil. And do you fancy saving the planet while balancing on two wheels? We look at the electric motorbikes zipping towards a greener future. Hello, I'm Azhar Sukri. This is Money Talks. China has sounded the alarm over the global economy. At a summit of Asian leaders in Manila, Chinese Premier Li Keqiang warned about increasing protectionism and inequality, and the latest figures appear to bear him out. Chinese data point to its economy slowing, but Europe appears to be roaring back to life. Staci Bivens takes a look now at how the diverging global economy could make things rather tricky for policymakers.
As U.S. President Donald Trump's tour of Asia ended, his message was resounding.
I am always going to put America first, the same way that I expect all of you in this room to put your countries first.
U.S. trade policy is diverging from the rest of the world, but a new shift in global growth patterns between Asia and Europe is also beginning to show. China's growing pains have been put under the spotlight again this week, with its trio of data-raising concerns of a further cooling economy. Investment grew 7.3% in the January to October period, but showed a dip from September's figures. Industrial output expanded 6.2% compared to the 6.6% increase in September. And retail sales grew 10%, but also came in weaker than the previous month's readings. Despite indications that the country's growth is starting to show signs of fatigue, China is sticking to its guns, choosing to focus on quality over speed.
Whether it's in terms of supply, demand, or market expectations, we can say that it's entirely possible to maintain steady growth next year. Now, when it comes to the meaning of this steady growth, the development of China's economy has already shifted from a past stage of high-speed growth to a stage of high-quality development.
While China continues to pursue a balancing act, the Eurozone economy is revving up its engines. The third quarter GDP grew 2.5% year-on-year. The growth was powered by Germany, which is looking to seal its status as the bloc's juggernaut. Data released on Tuesday show the country grew about 0.8% on the quarter, a beat on its second quarter reading. Italy, which is typically seen as a laggard in the region, is starting to show signs of revival, beating expectations with a 0.5% raise in quarterly growth. And the EU finance chief is bullish about the rosy outlook.
This year, 2017, is on a really good track to be the first in 10 years during which all countries of the European Union, without exception, will observe economic growth. And 2018 looks set to be a year of widespread growth for all member states.
Outside the Eurozone, Britain is bracing for an economic slowdown to get worse as it departs the EU. With the budget plan announcement just around the corner, British Finance Minister Philip Hammond is facing pressure to prop up the economy while softening the impact of Brexit. The country is growing at half the rate of Germany, and inflation is at the highest in 5 years. Like the Chinese policymakers, Hammond is on thin ice with planning an economic turnaround, but the outcome could cost him his job. Staci Bivens, TRT World.
Now, David Madden is a market analyst at CMC Markets, and he joins us now from London. Welcome back to Money Talks, David. So we've got a diverging picture. We've got growth in emerging Asia looking like it's slowing slightly, Europe picking up steam. If you're a global investor with a global portfolio, how do you play this story?
Well, some of the interesting numbers we've seen out of China and also the Eurozone today point that China's economy is going from, say, a fifth gear, which it was in a couple of years ago, and it's now making a slow and steady move lower into, say, third or fourth gear. But the economy is still doing exceptionally well. China is on track to achieve its target of 6.5% growth this year, whereas the Eurozone is obviously picking up. The latest Eurozone GDP numbers show that the economy grew by 2.5%, which is obviously must be taken in context. 5 or 6 years ago, the Eurozone was quite literally in the doldrums. So we had the Eurozone debt crisis raging. Thankfully, that's behind us now. So these growth figures from both countries must be taken in respect of, say, their own performance over the last 5 or 7 years. In relation to what do we do if you're a global investor, you may want to rethink some long positions you have if you were very much exposed to the Far East. For example, Standard Chartered and HSBC are very much dependent on growth in emerging markets, including China. And conversely, if you were looking to potentially grow, we could see additional growth in the Eurozone. It wasn't that long ago that we had a record high in the German DAX and the CAC 40 in France. And seeing as Mario Draghi, the head of the ECB, has stated that he's concerned about low inflation in the region and he's willing to use additional stimulus if it's necessary, we could always see additional QE being pumped through the Eurozone and in turn propping up asset prices.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the EU and the ECB because, I mean, a lot of what's driving the EU's economy right now is all of that excess liquidity sloshing around. But at the same time, the ECB is looking like it's going to trim back some of that liquidity and pull back some of those billions of dollars that it's pumping into the economy every month. How is the economy going to respond as that QE gets pulled back? Are we going to see some of that growth taper off as well?
That's quite possibly going to be the case, bearing in mind the growth figures that we saw from the Eurozone were for the third quarter. And if you cast your mind back, the euro was in a much weaker shape at the beginning and the middle of 2017. So a lot of the solid economic growth figures across all the various different economic indicators, construction, services, manufacturing, industrial production, and so on and so forth, were largely taken from an era when the euro was in a far weaker position. The euro's done quite well versus the US dollar and the British pound in recent months. And with that, we're going to see a slight trickle-down impact into the growth. Bearing in mind, we are talking low single-digit figures here for the Eurozone growth. So we could see a slight trimming of the growth rate while the impact of the strong euro works its way down into the economic indicators.
David, so when you look around the world right now, where do you see the greatest opportunities?
Well, given that the European Central Bank still have a QE policy in place, which they're going to have until the end of September 2018, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's even extended beyond that again, perhaps with an even lower size in terms of its monthly bond buying. But given that the Eurozone is finally kind of getting out of the doldrums and the QE is being slowly phased out, I think the growth is going to continue from the Eurozone from here. OK. David
Madden in CMC Markets in London. Thank you very much indeed. Now, in the UK, going to a bank to do your chores has been on the decline for many years. More and more people prefer to go online, of course, and that has led to many branches of leading banks to shut shop. And this year, a record number will be closing down for good. Muttalip Erdogan has more from London.
Brick and mortar bank branches are expensive to maintain, and the UK's leading banks have steadily been closing their branches and pushing the business online. By the end of this year, Britain will have only 8,000 branches left. That's half the number there was in 1989. This is going to save the banks tens of millions of dollars, but customers are divided.
I think the idea that banks are closing is great. There's really no need for them anymore. Everything that you could do online.
I just don't trust online banking. I would rather go to a bank and know my money is paid in. I'm going to check the accounts.
These are just a couple of the concerns some customers have. They also worry about security breaches, which have become a commonplace in the cyber domain, with identity fraud, theft and malware. And then there is phishing. An email claims to be from a customer's bank, which directs them to a fake, identical website. Then customers are asked to verify their personal information. By doing so, customers give their data to fraudsters. Despite all these risks, customers keep moving towards online banking. And over the past 5 years, the use of banking apps has rocketed by more than 350%. There were almost 20 million users across the UK in 2016, with banking app logins reaching 4.9 billion, an annual rise of 34%, while the total number of banking app transactions hit 932 million. That's 30 customer transactions per second. If online banking continues to grow at this rate, more and more branches will inevitably have to close, and jobs will be lost. But it's unlikely that branches will totally disappear. Even in this digital age, many people still feel the need to see a real person. Muttalip Erdogan, TRT World, London.
Still to come on Money Talks, vive les nukes. Not for much longer. France's new energy minister wants to end his country's reliance on nuclear power. The details ahead. But first, a quick roundup of the other top business stories from around the world in 60 seconds. Standard & Poor's says Venezuela has defaulted on coupon payments on bonds due in 2019 and 2024. S&P also warned there's a strong chance Venezuela would miss more payments within 3 months. President Nicolas Maduro met creditors for talks on restructuring Venezuela's $60 billion in outstanding bonds, but failed to reach an agreement. Music streaming service Spotify will start selling beauty products on its platform. It's the latest expansion of its partnership with Merch Bar, which sells artists' merchandise on their profile pages. It'll not take a cut of the makeup sales. Spotify has more than 60 million paying users. Amazon will sell computers used for its cloud services in China to its local partner. The e-commerce giant says it's making the move to comply with new Chinese regulations. Amazon says Chinese law forbids foreign companies from owning or operating certain cloud-related technologies. Beijing Synnet said it'll pay up to $300 million for the assets. Now, protesters at this year's climate change conference in Germany have interrupted the US's attempt to promote coal. Meanwhile, Greenpeace and other environmental activists are suing Norway's government. In the first case of its kind, the group says the country's oil exploration activities in the Arctic are against the law and need to be stopped. Proceedings at the Oslo District Court are underway.
Our aim is to get the court to invalidate the licenses that the government has handed out, which will set a very important precedent for how much environmental damage a government is allowed to do while they know it is wrong.
We think that there is really no legal basis for the claim. If they should find in favor of the main arguments of the plaintiffs, then that would be a prohibition on any major emission of carbon from Norway. So that would obviously have tremendous effects on Norwegian industry in general.
So let's go to Norway now and speak to Catherine Banet. She's an associate professor of petroleum and energy law at the University of Oslo. Catherine, great to have you on Money Talks. Now, Greenpeace says Norway's government is violating the 2015 Paris Climate Accord and that is the basis for their lawsuit. Do they have a strong case?
They do have a case in terms of development of the case law internationally, because we see that there is an increase, a global trend in terms of climate litigation. But this case, you have to really remind that it is a two-level case. There is first the domestic question of the interpretation of a new reinforced environment provision in the Constitution, which is paragraph 112. And on the other side, you have more of the influence of the international climate litigation and how potentially the case law can change national climate policy.
OK, Catherine, what would be the legal consequences if Greenpeace wins? Could it, for example, set a precedent in other parts of the world and make it harder for oil exploration in ecologically sensitive areas?
No, absolutely. It must be said first that it will be a hard decision, hard to win that case. But if they win, it is clearly first a question of interpretation, a strong interpretation of a legal provision in the Constitution that guarantee individual rights in terms of protection of the environment for future generation, and not least the fact that climate science must be taken extremely seriously, and we have in terms of climate change policies and what the government is committed to do. And we have seen some elements of that already in previous decisions. You have, for example, in the Netherlands, the very now well-known case, Urgenda from 2015, which is on appeal, and which contained prescriptive decisions towards the government to act and to change its climate policy. You have a decision in Pakistan as well from 2015. And just at the beginning of the month in New Zealand, the High Court came with a similar decision. So we see that by reaching such a decision, if the first instance in Oslo does, then it will just confirm that case law.
Now, Norway is making a big push, of course, towards renewable energy for domestic use, but much of the government's funding comes from the export of oil. How do the people of Norway feel about this discrepancy?
Well, I'm a lawyer, so I have to give some general comments of what the population may think. But it is clear that, for example, the drop in oil price has made people and companies realize that they need to diversify their economy. And people having jobs connected to the petroleum industry are very well aware of now that need to diversify. And then the companies, petroleum companies, oil and gas companies, are also diversifying their activities. We see that Statoil is moving towards an energy company, as Dong is doing as well in Denmark, and changing the name.
I see.
And we see as well that the population is very well aware of that energy transition.
OK, thank you very much indeed for your time. I'm afraid we are out of time, but Catherine Banet there from the University of Oslo, thank you. Now, another European country trying to balance environmental concerns with its energy needs is France. Its energy minister has told the Financial Times that France is considering shifting the focus of state-owned electricity utility EDF away from nuclear power to renewable sources. Now, currently, 3/4 of France's energy comes from nuclear power, but Nicolas Hulot says in the interview that France aims to cut that to 50% by 2035. Now, almost 1/3 of EDF's 58 nuclear reactors are under maintenance, and the government says it plans to close 25 of them within the next 15 years. EDF shares fell more than 10% on Monday. That was its biggest intraday loss since its listing in 2005. EDF says it's cutting its earnings targets for 2018 due to delays in reopening some of its reactors. The stock made a slight recovery on Tuesday, gaining 2%. Let's get more on this now from TRT World's editor-at-large, Kraker Peters, who joins me from Paris. Great to have you, as always, Craig. Now, France has been reliant on nuclear energy for quite some time, for nearly 5 decades now. How is France going to wean itself off nuclear power?
Well, first of all, I think it needs to be known that Nicolas Hulot is a politician standing on a soapbox. There's nothing new in that interview. The French National Assembly in 2015 voted to cut by 50% France's 58 nuclear reactors. So this process is going to be ongoing. These renewables they talk about, it's still questionable whether there's going to be enough there to actually power France. Now, you may say, well, you know, France is the largest nuclear power producer in the world, et cetera, et cetera. But just a few days ago, EDF reported that demand is up and production is not up to speed, and they're expecting cutbacks this winter that are not to exceed 2 hours, and they're just going to have these cutbacks during the day, no night cuts, and just in rural areas. So there's clearly something amiss within the atomic power electricity generating system here in France.
Tell us a little bit more about Nicolas Hulot. He's quite an interesting character in terms of the French body politic. He's long spoken out against nuclear power and against fossil fuels, hasn't he?
Well, yes, and I think to a degree to his detriment. You have to understand the history here. France went nuclear in 1973 in reaction to the oil crisis. There was a prime minister at the time by the name of Paul Mesmer, and he created what was known as the Mesmer Plan. And that plan, in one sentence, which became a slogan here in France, was, in France we do not have oil, but we have ideas. Because France had no oil or coal or any other energy, they started to build nuclear power plants and sell them abroad. And France is a great engineering country. They built wonderful power plants. In the history, there's only been a dozen incidents here in France, most of them fairly minor. And they were so successful at doing this that it became the biggest exporter of energy within the EU.
Right. Craig,
so it was a real success story here.
Quick final question. EDF is struggling with heavy debts. Can it survive in its current form for much longer?
No, particularly when 85% of its shares are in government hands. EDF needs more privatization. The government is now pushing it into these renewables. And again, one has to wonder if that other energy there. And remember one other thing here, boys and girls. This is very important. You know, France avoids 31 billion tons of carbon emissions every year because of their nuclear power facilities. It's a big number.
I'm afraid we are going to have to leave it there. We are out of time. Kraker Peters in Paris, thank you. Now, they may not make much noise, but electric bikes have been creating quite a buzz at the Milan Motorcycle Show, and even though only 1/10 of the two-wheelers on display there were electric, industry experts predict demand for them is going to accelerate, especially as consumers become increasingly concerned for the environment. Christine Piravalakis was there and sent this report.
It's compact, able to quickly navigate through congested city streets, and more environmentally friendly than a traditional petrol-powered car. As motorbike sales plateau in many markets, the popularity of electric scooters, motorcycles, and bicycles is on the rise. There are 200 million electric bikes on the road today, and the market is expected to grow by 4.7% over the next 5 years, with an estimated 2 billion bikes on the streets by 2050. Price is another factor driving growth. The average price of an electric road bike is $4,750, compared to $6,000 for a petrol-powered one. An electric scooter costs around $2,800, compared to $3,100 for a petrol scooter. The global electric motorcycle market has traditionally been dominated by a few companies, but it's now been swarmed with many new players, all eager to get a piece of the action. French automaker Peugeot built the first mass-produced electric scooter back in 1996. As with all electric vehicles, finding a charging station is challenging, and so are the high-charging prices.
It's a new market, so recharging is definitely still an issue for many people, and that's why we have a removable battery. Battery recycling is something that still has to be discussed properly.
This startup has harnessed this new technology and wants to make China's electric scooters as desirable as iPhones.
In the X series, the Project X, we think about before you have accident, before you have problem, to solve it.
Another new player in the electric motorcycle market is Spanish motorbike maker Volta, specializing in more powerful street and off-road bikes.
This is our main idea, commuting with fun.
As electric bikes continue to grow in popularity, so too will the design challenges for inventors and designers to build a better and more cost-efficient urban bike. Christine Pirovolakis, TRT World, Milan, Italy.
That's it from Money Talks for now. Thanks for watching.